Join us as we follow the journey of 4 American students who traveled to the Soviet Union in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Convinced that the negative propaganda about the country is false, the students are shocked to find themselves in a world far different from anything they have ever known. As they explore the country, they encounter poverty, fear, and mistrust at every turn. However, their journey takes a shocking turn when they are suddenly accused of espionage and thrown into prison. Will they ever be able to escape and return home? Follow along as we uncover the truth behind this incredible story. The year was 1962, and tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were at an all-time high. It was in this climate that 4 American students, 2 girls and 2 guys, decided to embark on a journey to the heart of the Soviet Union. They had grown up hearing stories of the so-called utopia that was the Soviet Union, and had become convinced that the negative propaganda being spread about the country was just that, propaganda. However, as events unfolded, they quickly realized that they were in for a rude awakening. As the students arrived in the USSR, the Cuban Missile Crisis was just beginning to unfold. They found themselves in the midst of a country on high alert, with soldiers and tanks lining the streets. It was a jarring experience for the 4 Americans, who had never seen such a display of military might before. Despite this, the students remained hopeful, convinced that they would be able to disprove the myths that had been perpetuated about the Soviet Union. However, as they began to explore the country, they quickly began to realize that the negative propaganda they had heard was, in fact, true. The poverty they encountered was staggering, with many people struggling to eke out a living. The students were shocked by the lack of basic amenities like hot water and electricity, things they had always taken for granted back home. They were also disturbed by the pervasive sense of fear and mistrust that seemed to permeate every aspect of life in the USSR. As they walked through Red Square one day, the students were suddenly accosted by a group of soldiers. They were accused of espionage and thrown into prison. It was then that they realized that they had been set up by the Soviet Union, which had planted them in the country in order to exchange them for their own agents being held in the United States. The conditions in the prison were appalling, and the students were subjected to torture and abuse. As they languished in their cells, they finally came to the realization that the Soviet Union was a criminal and oppressive regime, far worse than anything they had ever imagined. Finally, after weeks of captivity, the students were released. It was a bittersweet moment, as they were elated to be free but devastated by the horrors they had experienced. The Soviet Union had once again taken advantage of America's policy of rescuing its citizens at any cost, using the 4 students as bargaining chips in a dangerous game of international politics. In the end, the students returned home, forever scarred by their experiences. They had set out to dispel the myths about the Soviet Union, but instead, they had become unwitting pawns in a dangerous game. It was a lesson they would never forget, a reminder that the world was a far more complex and dangerous place than they had ever imagined. After their harrowing experience in the Soviet Union, the 4 American students returned home determined to expose the true nature of communism and fight against it in the United States. They had seen firsthand the horrors of living under a repressive regime, and they knew that they had to do everything in their power to prevent such a system from taking root in their own country. The students began by speaking out about their experiences in the Soviet Union, giving interviews and writing articles about the dangers of communism. They also joined political groups and organizations that were dedicated to fighting against communist influence in the United States. One of the students, a young woman named Sarah, became particularly passionate about the cause. She organized rallies and protests, speaking out against communism and calling for increased vigilance in defending American values. Her speeches and articles gained national attention, and she quickly became a prominent figure in the fight against communism. The other 3 students also played their part, working behind the scenes to help support the cause. They volunteered at political events, distributed literature, and even went undercover to gather information about communist activities in the United States. Over time, their efforts began to pay off. More and more people began to realize the dangers of communism, and support for the cause grew. The students became leaders in the movement, helping to shape policy and drive public opinion. Eventually, their work helped to contribute to the downfall of communism, not just in the United States, but around the world. They had seen the horrors of living under a repressive regime firsthand, and they knew that they had a responsibility to prevent such a system from ever taking root in their own country. Their determination, bravery, and commitment to the cause had a lasting impact, and their legacy lives on to this day.